Hey everyone, and welcome. So, if you're a doctoral student, you've probably heard the term ethnography thrown around. It can sound pretty intense, right? Well, today we're going to break it all down. We're going to do it by listening in on a chat between a curious PhD student and a professor who's seen it all. So, our student kicks things off with this really fundamental question. They've done the reading, they get the theory, but they want to know, how do you get past the surface level? How do you really truly get what it's like to live as part of a group from the inside out? And the professor says that's the perfect question because answering it is a whole journey. So here's our roadmap. First, we'll figure out what ethnography even is. Then we'll look at the two big paths you can take as a researcher. After that, we get practical. How do you get into the field? How do you turn all your notes into a real story? And finally, and this is a big one, what are your responsibilities when you do this kind of work?
Okay, so what is ethnography? Well, the professor makes it super clear. This isn't about standing on the sidelines with a clipboard. Not at all. It's about deep immersion. It's about actually living as much as you can within a culture to understand it from the inside.
So here's the formal definition. The professor points out that the most important part of this whole sentence is culture sharing group. We're not talking about a random crowd of people. We're talking about a group, say a team of nurses on a specific hospital floor, or maybe a classroom of kindergartners. People who have been together long enough to have their own unwritten rules, their own language, their own way of doing things.
So what makes it so different, the student asks, and the professor breaks it down like this. First, it's always about that culture sharing group. Second, this isn't a weekend project, it's long-term. You're right there participating and observing. Your goal? To spot the patterns, the rituals, the things everyone just knows. And this is key, you have to blend the insider view, what they call the emic perspective, with your own researcher's view, the etic one. Put it all together and you get this rich, complete picture of their world. The professor then points to a diagram like this one and says, this is basically your treasure map for the whole process. And you can see it's a cycle, right? You start by finding the right group, then you get in the field, you gather all this information, and then you start the real work of making sense of it all. It all leads to creating that big picture interpretation you're aiming for.
But then the student brings up a really good point. I've heard people talk about realist and critical ethnography. I don't really get the difference. And yeah, this can be confusing. The professor says it really comes down to a choice you have to make. What's your job here? Are you just an objective reporter or are you an advocate for change? And this chart just lays it all out perfectly. Think of the realist ethnographer as a documentarian. They're trying to be objective, standing back, reporting the facts in the third person. Their goal is just to describe the culture exactly as they see it. But the critical ethnographer, they jump right in. They're advocates. They're focused on things like power and inequality. Their goal isn't just to describe the world, it's to challenge it and to help lift up marginalized voices.
Okay, that makes sense, our student says. But how do you actually do it? How do you even get started? How do you get anyone to let you in? And that, right there, is the million-dollar question for every new ethnographer.
So the professor lays out these crucial first moves. First off, you got to make sure this method is even right for your question. Then, find your group. But look at step 3. That's the one. You can't just show up. You need a gatekeeper, someone on the inside who can vouch for you and open the door. And this gatekeeper role is so important. This isn't just a formality. This is the person who holds the keys to the community. They have to trust you. So your first job isn't to collect data. It's to build a relationship. You have to be genuine, you have to listen, and you have to be totally upfront about what you're doing. That's how you earn your way in. Okay, so let's say our student is in. They found a great gatekeeper, they're taking mountains of notes, but now they're just drowning in all this information. The next question is, how do I turn this huge pile of observations into something that actually makes sense, into a story? The secret, the professor explains, is to constantly balance two different points of view. You've got the emic perspective. That's the insider view. It's their words, their feelings. You capture that with direct quotes. Then you have the etic perspective. That's you, the researcher, putting on your analyst hat, seeing the bigger patterns and connecting it all to theory. A great ethnography just weaves those two together beautifully. So where do you start building that story? Well, it begins with just getting everything down. You have to create a super detailed description of what's going on, using your field notes and interview transcripts. You capture the little details, the conversations, the feeling in the room. This is your foundation. Then, once you have that rich description,
You start to analyze. You become a detective. You're looking for patterns, for ideas that keep popping up. You start to sort and tag your data, and slowly but surely, you'll see these larger cultural themes start to emerge from the noise. And finally, you pull all those themes together to build your big picture interpretation. What you're really trying to answer is, how does this group work? What are the unwritten rules here? You're not just listing things you saw. You're explaining the system. You're painting that holistic portrait. And the end goal of all this is something called thick description. This quote from Fetterman just nails it. It's more than just writing down what you saw. It's a record of cultural interpretation. It helps your reader understand not just what people did, but what their actions actually meant in that world. At this point, the student is feeling excited, ready to go. But the professor stops them. Hold on. There's one last thing we need to talk about, and it might be the most important part of this whole conversation: your responsibility. Because look, this kind of research is hard. It takes a ton of time, and funding is always an issue. There's a real risk of going native where you get so immersed you can't be objective anymore. You have to be honest about how your presence is changing things. And then there are all these huge ethical questions about who owns the data, what you're giving back to the community, and just fundamentally respecting the people who let you into their lives.
And that leads us to the professor's final, crucial question. Ethnography is an incredibly powerful way to understand the human experience. But it's more than just a research method. It's a huge ethical commitment. So the question you have to ask yourself is this: when you walk into someone else's world, are you truly prepared to carry the weight and the responsibility of telling their story?